My wife was embarrassed as a single mother of 3 kids. After our divorce, she did not break. She did not beg. She did not ask a single soul on that train for their approval. But by the time that journey ended, every person in that compartment understood exactly who Amara was, exactly who stood beside her, and exactly how wrong they had been. Before we move on, tell me in the comments which state you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow's episode may touch a story that is still unfolding. Chicago Union Station does not slow down for anyone. It moves the way the city itself moves, fast, indifferent, full of people carrying lives that other people cannot see. And on a cold Tuesday morning, somewhere inside that controlled chaos of announcements and rolling luggage and hurried footsteps, Amara walked through those doors carrying more than any one person should carry alone. She had 3 children with her. Kofi, her oldest, 9 years old and already wearing the quiet seriousness of a boy who had watched his mother struggle and decided, somewhere deep inside himself, that he would not add to it. Zara, 7, bright-eyed and clutching a stuffed elephant she had named Gerald. And Nia, the youngest at 3 years old, already fussing before they had even reached the platform, her small legs tired, her patience completely gone. Amara had 2 carry-on bags, a diaper bag, the children's backpacks, her own bag strapped across her chest. She moved through the station the way single mothers move through everything, with precision, with exhaustion hidden underneath composure, with the particular grace of a woman who has learned that there is no pause button on motherhood. She was dressed neatly, her coat was pressed, her natural hair was pulled back and pinned with care. She was not disheveled, she was not loud. She was a woman managing a full life in a public space, and she was doing it with a dignity that required no audience and no applause. The train was the Illinois Central southbound line, departing Chicago heading toward New Orleans, a long-haul journey she had planned for 3 months. This was not spontaneous. This was saved money. This was a promise she had made to her children after a year that had asked too much of all of them. Getting the children settled into their seats took several minutes. Nia refused to sit. Zara dropped Gerald twice. Kofi asked 4 questions in 90 seconds. Amara answered each one without raising her voice. She stowed the bags, buckled what needed buckling, and finally lowered herself into her seat with the slow exhale of a woman who has been moving since before sunrise. A young woman across the aisle, Imani, a college student with kind eyes and a worn backpack, leaned over and helped slide the last bag into the overhead compartment without being asked. Amara looked at her and said quietly, "Thank you." Imani smiled. "I see you, sis." Nobody else in the compartment looked up. Not yet. Samuel noticed Amara the moment she walked in. Not with kindness, not with the instinct to help that Imani had shown without hesitation. Samuel noticed Amara the way certain people notice disruption, the way those who have built their comfort carefully and deliberately notice anything that threatens to unsettle it. He was seated 3 rows back with his wife, Renee. He was dressed in a dark blazer, polished shoes, a watch that announced itself before he said a word. He carried himself with the particular confidence of a man who had money and wanted a room to know it. Renee sat beside him, quiet, scrolling through her phone, wrapped in a fur-trimmed coat. Samuel watched Amara settle her children. He watched Nia fuss. He watched the bags, the backpacks, the organized chaos of a mother managing 3 small lives in a confined space, and his expression did not soften once. He picked up the magazine on his lap, fanned himself once with the slow deliberateness of a man performing boredom for an audience, and leaned slightly toward Renee. "This is supposed to be a relaxing ride," he said, his voice pitched just low enough to be private and just loud enough to be heard. "Not a circus." Renee did not look up from her phone. He said it again, differently. "Some people have no consideration." Still, Renee said nothing. Samuel settled back into his seat. He crossed one leg over the other. He opened his magazine. But his eyes kept moving back to Amara, back to the children, back to the controlled irritation he had already decided to feel. There was something specific in the way he watched. It was not simple annoyance. It was the particular contempt of a person who had constructed a story about a stranger before that stranger had done a single thing wrong. He had looked at Amara, at the children, at the bags, at the empty seat beside her, and had already written the verdict. She was a problem, she was disorder. She was everything he had not paid for this seat to sit beside. Amara could not see him watching. She was focused entirely on her children, on Nia's small shoes, on making sure Zara's seatbelt was fastened properly, on answering Kofi's question about how long the ride would take. She did not know the judgment had already begun. She did not know the man 3 rows back had already decided who she was. She was simply a mother on a train, taking her children somewhere beautiful. And that was enough. That was already enough. But Samuel had not learned that yet. It was Kofi who caused the accident, and he did not mean to. He had been holding a small bag of chips, the kind of snack Amara had packed carefully in a Ziploc measured portions, nothing extravagant, and when he reached across to show Zara something on the seat beside her, the bag slipped. It hit the floor. Chips scattered across the compartment aisle in a small, crunching, completely harmless disaster. Kofi froze. His eyes went immediately to his mother. Amara was already reaching down. "It is okay, baby," she said softly. "Accidents happen." She pulled a small travel packet of napkins from the diaper bag, because Amara was the kind of mother who always had what was needed, and began gathering the chips from the floor quietly, efficiently, without scene. Kofi crouched beside her and helped without being asked. That should have been the end of it, a small moment, a child's accident, cleaned up in under a minute, the kind of thing that happens 100 times on 100 trains every single day. But Samuel had been watching. He set his magazine down with the deliberate slowness of a man who has decided to make something of nothing. He looked at the chips on the floor. He looked at Kofi. He looked at Amara on her knees cleaning up, and something in his expression shifted from passive contempt into something sharper. He said it loud, not loud enough to shout, but loud enough, calibrated, designed to land. Some people simply do not raise their children, they just release them. The words moved through the compartment like a current. An older woman 2 seats ahead stiffened. Imani looked up from her book. A man across the aisle glanced over, then looked quickly away. Amara stopped, not because she was broken by it, but because the words required a moment, a breath, a conscious decision about what came next. She finished cleaning the floor. She stood. She placed her hand gently on Kofi's shoulder and guided him back into his seat. She folded the napkin. She sat down. She did not look at Samuel, not because she was afraid, but because she understood something that Samuel did not, that some responses are not given in the moment. That composure in the face of public humiliation is not weakness. It is a different kind of power altogether. Kofi looked at his mother with wide, uncertain eyes. She tucked his seatbelt gently and whispered, "You are fine. You did nothing wrong." He nodded. He believed her, because she had never given him a reason not to. Imani, across the aisle, exhaled slowly through her nose. She looked at Samuel with the quiet, measured disapproval of a young woman who had witnessed too many versions of this exact scene to pretend it was anything other than what it was. Samuel picked his magazine back up. He was not finished. Nia had been holding on for as long as a 3-year-old could hold on. She had been patient by her own small standards. She had sat. She had fussed only a little. She had allowed her mother to manage the bags, manage her siblings, manage the entire architecture of this journey with limited complaint. But somewhere past the south side of Chicago, as the train moved out of the city and the urban landscape began to open into flat winter fields, Nia's stuffed elephant, Zara's elephant, actually Gerald, the one Nia had borrowed without permission, slipped from her lap and fell to the floor under the seat in front of her. And Nia could not reach it. She tried. She leaned forward, her small arm reaching, her fingers grabbing nothing. She tried again, and then in the way of 3-year-olds everywhere, the frustration became too large for her body to contain, and she began to cry. Not a quiet cry, the full, unguarded, bottom-lip-out cry of a small child who has been holding herself together and simply cannot anymore. Amara reached for Gerald immediately. She retrieved the elephant in seconds. She placed it in Nia's arms and pulled her close, murmuring softly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. It took perhaps 45 seconds, but Samuel did not give it 45 seconds. Before Amara had even fully settled Nia, his voice cut through the compartment, clear, contemptuous, and fully intended to be heard by every person in that car. This is exactly why people have serious concerns about single mothers. No structure, no discipline, no father present, just disorder inflicted on everyone around them. Some of us paid for a peaceful journey, not this. Complete silence. the kind of silence that does not feel like peace, the kind that feels like a room holding its breath. Amara's hands slowed. She kept her arms around Nia. She kept her face turned toward her daughter. But her jaw tightened, just slightly, just enough for Amani to see it, and her eyes grew bright in a way that had nothing to do with joy. Renee, beside Samuel, finally looked up from her phone. She looked at her husband. Then she looked at Amara. Something moved across her face, not quite shame, not quite apology, but something uneasy, something that recognized a line had been crossed that could not simply be uncrossed. Amani stood halfway out of her seat. The older woman 2 rows ahead, turned fully around to look at Samuel, with an expression that required no words. And Amara held her daughter. She held Nia against her chest, one hand pressed to the small of her daughter's back, and she breathed, slowly, deliberately. She had absorbed his first insult in silence. She had absorbed his contempt in silence. But the compartment had heard it all, every word, every syllable. And the train rolled on. The voice came from the back of the car. Not raised, not rushed. The kind of voice that did not need volume because it carried a different kind of weight entirely, the weight of a man who was completely unafraid. "Excuse me." 2 words, that was all. But the entire compartment shifted. Heads turned, the older woman 2 rows ahead turned in her seat. Imani turned. Renee turned. Even Samuel, for the first time, looked somewhere other than at Amara. A man was standing. He was tall, the kind of height that registers before anything else. Dressed in a charcoal overcoat, clean and well-fitted. No jewelry except a simple watch. No performance in how he stood. He was simply standing, and the act of it seemed to restructure the air in the entire car. He began walking forward, slow, measured, each step deliberate in the way that communicated clearly this man was not hurrying because this man did not need to hurry. Nobody spoke. Amara had her back to him. She was still focused on Nia, still holding her daughter, still doing the work of mothering in the middle of a public humiliation. She had not turned around. But Kofi had. Kofi had turned, and his face had gone through several expressions in the span of 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and then something that cracked open into pure, uncomplicated joy. "Daddy," not a shout, a single word, delivered with the breathless certainty of a child who cannot believe what his own eyes are showing him. Zara spun around in her seat. "Daddy," this one louder, this one free. Even Nia, still pressed against Amara's chest, her tears not fully dry, lifted her head toward the sound of her siblings' voices. She looked toward the aisle. She looked at the man walking toward them. "Dada," she said it quietly, like a question that already knew its answer. Amara turned. She turned slowly, the way a person turns when they are not entirely certain what they are about to see, when hope and reality are still negotiating. And she saw him, walking down the aisle of that train car with the unhurried certainty of a man arriving exactly where he intended to arrive. Amari. Her expression did not collapse into tears. It did not break into a smile immediately. It simply went still, the particular stillness of a person absorbing something real after a long time of managing alone. The compartment watched. Nobody had a single word left. Amari did not look at Samuel first. He walked directly to his children. He crouched right there in the aisle in his charcoal overcoat and his polished shoes, and he opened his arms. Kofi and Zara came into them without hesitation, the way children move toward safety. He held both of them together, one arm around each, and he pressed his face briefly into the space between them. He pulled back. He looked at Kofi directly. "You have been taking care of things." Kofi straightened slightly. "Yes, sir." Amari nodded once. That was enough. He turned to Zara, touched her cheek with one hand, and smiled, the first smile he had shown since standing. Then he turned to Nia, still in Amara's arms, still watching him with wide, wet eyes. He reached out and took Nia. She went to him completely, tucking her head against his neck the way she had been doing since she was born, finding the exact same place, as if her body remembered it without being told. He stood with her. He stood with his daughter in his arms in the middle of that train car, and he looked at Amara, not with pity, not with performance. He looked at her the way people look at someone they respect fully and without condition. Then he turned to Samuel. He did not raise his voice. He did not step closer. He simply looked at the man with the calm, settled authority of someone who has no argument to win because the truth is already standing in the room. "What was it," Amara said quietly, "that you were saying about no father present?" The question landed like a closed door. Samuel opened his mouth. Nothing came. Renee looked at her husband, then she looked at the floor. The older woman in the seat ahead exhaled slowly, the sound of someone who had seen this kind of reckoning before and had been waiting for it patiently. Imani pressed her lips together and looked out the window, not because she was uninterested, but because the moment was too full for anything else. Amara said nothing. She did not need to. Amari was standing beside her. Nia was in his arms. Kofi and Zara were pressed against his side. And the entire constructed narrative that Samuel had built in that compartment, about disorder, about absent fathers, about the supposed failure of a woman raising children alone, stood exposed for exactly what it had always been. Wrong, entirely wrong, and now everyone in that car knew it. Samuel stared at his magazine. The train moved south through Illinois, carrying all of it, the silence, the stillness, the weight of a moment that had shifted everything. Amari did not sit down. He stood in that aisle, Nia still settled against his chest, and he looked around the compartment once, not aggressively, not with theater, just long enough to make clear that what he was about to say was not for Samuel alone. It was for everyone who had listened without speaking, for everyone who had heard the insults and looked away. "I want to be clear about something," he said. His voice was the same, unhurried, even carrying no heat. The kind of delivery that is more powerful than anger because it suggests that the man speaking it has never once doubted what he is saying. "This is Amara. She is my ex-wife. We ended our marriage 4 years ago. That decision was mutual, it was difficult, and it was the right one for both of us." He paused, he let that sit. What did not end, what we agreed from the very first conversation after the divorce would never end, is our commitment to these children. Every school meeting, every doctor's appointment, every difficult conversation a child needs a father present for. I have been there, I am here now. He looked at Samuel directly. "She is not raising these children alone because I abandoned them. She is carrying the daily weight of motherhood because she is extraordinary at it. There is a difference. And the fact that you cannot see a man beside her and automatically assume absence, that says everything about your assumptions and nothing about her life." The compartment was absolutely still. Not the uncomfortable stillness of before, the held breath stillness of people waiting for something to end. This was a different quiet, the quiet of people absorbing something true. The older woman too rose up, nodded once, slowly, with the gravity of someone who has lived long enough to recognize a real statement when she hears one. Imani had tears in her eyes that she was not bothering to hide. Renee was no longer looking at her phone. She was looking at Amara, and in her expression was something complicated and honest. The recognition of a woman who had sat beside cruelty and said nothing. The beginning of understanding what that silence had cost. Amara sat straight in her seat, her hands folded in her lap. She was not crying. She was not performing relief. She was simply present, still and dignified, the way she had been since the moment she walked through the doors of Chicago Union Station. She had never needed the compartment's approval. But the truth, spoken clearly and publicly by a man who had every reason and every platform to let it be known, that was something different. That was not rescue. That was recognition. And Amara received it quietly, the way she received everything, with composure, with grace, and with the unshakable knowledge that she had known who she was the entire time. Renee spoke before her husband could collect himself. It was not loud, it was not theatrical. It was the quiet, controlled voice of a woman who had made a decision. "Samuel," she said his name once, just his name. And the way she said it communicated everything, the embarrassment, the exhaustion, the silent accumulation of moments exactly like this one that she had been carrying for far longer than one train ride. Samuel turned to her. "That is enough," Renee said. "You have said more than enough." His mouth opened. She looked at him not with anger but with a finality that closed the conversation before it began. He looked away. He uncrossed his legs. He set his magazine on the empty seat beside him and said nothing. The correction did not come from a stranger. It did not come from a man larger than him or with more authority in the room. It came from the person seated closest to him, the person who had chosen him, the person whose opinion of him mattered most. And it landed accordingly. The older woman across the aisle, silver-haired, in a church coat, with the bearing of a woman who had been dignified her entire life, looked at the whole compartment and spoke once. "That," she said, gesturing with one slow nod toward Amara, toward the children, "is what a family looks like. Not a building, not a last name, a commitment." Nobody argued. Nobody had the language to argue. Because the woman was not speaking in abstractions. She was pointing at something real and visible and present, a man who had stood up on a moving train and spoken truth without flinching, a woman who had held herself with complete dignity under public assault, 3 children who, in the middle of all of it, had simply been loved consistently by both parents. Samuel stared out the window. He had come onto this train with every social advantage he believed mattered: wealth, presentation, the confidence of a man accustomed to the benefit of the doubt. And in the space of 10 minutes, he had revealed the precise limits of all of it. Renee did not look at him again for a long time. She looked at Amara. Amara did not offer her a smile. She did not offer reassurance or absolution. She simply met Renee's eyes, held them for a moment, and then looked back at her children. She was not in the business of managing other people's guilt. She had 3 children to take care of, and she was very good at it. The compartment exhaled. The tension that had been building since Chicago, since the first loaded silence, since the first magazine-fanning performance of irritation, all of it began to settle, slowly, like dust after a door has been closed. Imani had been watching Amara since he stood. There was something about him, beyond the authority, beyond the composure, something specific she could not immediately place. A recognition that was not quite complete, sitting at the edge of her memory, the way a name does when you cannot recall it but know absolutely that you know it. And then it arrived. She leaned forward in her seat, her eyes narrowing slightly, studying his face with the focused attention of someone cross-referencing a memory against a living person. "Excuse me," she said carefully. "I am so sorry to interrupt, but are you Amara Adisa from Meridian Sound Group, based out of Chicago?" Amara looked at her. He nodded once. "I am." Imani sat back. Her hand went to her mouth. "Oh my God." She looked at her phone, then back at him. "You executive produced the entire debut catalog for Zaya Carter. That album changed my life. I wrote my college application essay about that album." Amara smiled, genuinely this time, fully. "That is very kind." "Kind?" Imani shook her head. "That is just true." The compartment had gone through many versions of silence on this journey. This one was different from all of them. This one was the silence of recalibration, of people quietly, privately, dismantling the architecture of the assumptions they had been carrying. The woman they had watched struggle through Chicago Union Station. The woman Samuel had publicly named as a symbol of disorder and failure. The woman who had been reduced, in front of an entire train car, to a cautionary statement about absent fathers and structural collapse. That woman was the ex-wife of one of the most significant music industry executives in Chicago. Not because that made her more valuable, not because Amara's success changed anything about who Amara was or what she deserved, but because the gap between what Samuel had projected onto her and what was actually true, that gap was now visible to every person in the compartment. Fully, undeniably visible. Samuel had not moved. He was still facing the window, but his posture had changed. The careful architectural confidence that he had carried onto the train had gone somewhere. What remained was smaller. Renee was watching her husband. The older woman across the aisle was watching Amara. And Amara was watching her children, Kofi with his quiet seriousness, Zara with her stuffed elephant, Nia now calm and drowsy in her father's arms. And she was not thinking about Samuel or about Amara's career, or about any of the ways the compartment was now reassessing her. She was thinking about nothing except this. Her children safe, fed, loved, present. Everything else was noise. Amara looked at Amara. "Let me take them forward for a while," he said. "Rest." It was not a performance. It was not staged for the compartment's benefit. It was the language of 2 people who have co-parented long enough to develop their own shorthand, the economy of communication that only comes from years of shared commitment. Amara looked at her children. Kofi was already standing ready. Zara was pulling on Amara's sleeve. Nia was already asleep against his chest. "Go with your father," Amara said softly. "Behave." Kofi nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Before Amari moved, he turned to Imani. "Thank you," he said, "for helping her when she needed it." Imani shook her head. "It was nothing." "It was not nothing," he said. And then he walked forward with the children, the three of them folding around him as they moved down the aisle, and the sound of Zara asking him something in a loud whisper disappeared slowly as they went. The compartment settled. The movement of the train continued, steady south, carrying everyone toward wherever they were going. Raymond stood from his seat and walked the 3 rows to where Amara sat. He stood beside her row, hands clasped in front of him, and said quietly, "I am sorry for what was said. I should have spoken sooner." Amara looked at him. "You spoke when it mattered," she said. "That is more than most people do." He nodded. He walked back to his seat. Imani moved across the aisle and sat beside Amara, not to fill the silence, just to be there. After a while, Imani asked, not as gossip, not with sensationalism, but with genuine, searching curiosity, "How do you do it? How did the 2 of you build something like that after a divorce?" Amara looked out the window at the flat winter landscape, passing in long, uninterrupted stretches. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Love does not expire when a marriage ends. It changes shape. We chose to let it change into something our children could depend on." Imani did not say anything. There was nothing to add to that. The train moved toward New Orleans, through the cold American interior, past fields and small towns and everything in between. And Amara sat with her hands folded and her back straight and her eyes on the horizon, completely at peace, not because the journey had been easy, not because the people around her had been kind, but because she had known who she was from the very beginning, and she had never once put that down. Not for a single moment on this train, not for a single day in her life. She had carried 3 children and 2 bags and her own dignity through every door, onto every platform, into every room where someone decided, before she opened her mouth, exactly who she must be. And every single time, she had simply been herself. That had always been enough. That would always be enough. If you enjoyed this story, like this video, and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching.